It's time for the second round of the 2025 World Endurance Championship season. Welcome to the 6 Hours of Imola. And firstly, this race is happening on Easter Sunday. It happens on the 20th of April. The 6-hour race is going to be one that's really fun for spectators to attend, and it's one that I know I've had some friends go out to attend for the last couple of years because it's typically quite affordable as a race venue. But it's the home of Ferrari, right? It's the Autodromo Enzo Edino Ferrari. And it's a lovely, lovely location to have, like just out on the outskirts of the town, and has a lovely park all around as well. I'm using the word lovely quite a bit, but that's because as a venue, it is. And last year's race was a really fun one to follow as well. Toyota ended up picking up the win from Porsche by 7 seconds, though that is because the number 6 PPM car got a 5-second penalty. The podium was rounded out by the number 5 Porsche Penske. The top Ferrari was in 4th place, number 50, whilst the other two were in 7th and 8th places. It was a weekend where in the GT3s, it was a 1-2 at LMGT3 for Team WRT. They both were the only ones to finish on the lead GT3 lap, with the Farfus Galil Lung outing going ahead of Al-Hati, Martin and Rossi. Third place in that one was the Manthey Pure Racing Team. I think that was the one that in the end won the LMGT3 title. But it was one where you saw issues for Ford. I think, wasn't it the rear end fell off the 88, the Proton Mustang? It just kept on shedding bodywork. But they've been a lot better form so far this year. And that brings us nicely to talking about the balanced performance for the weekend. Because balanced performance, or BOP, as some people usually refer to it, or BOP, what it means, if you're someone who's new to endurance racing, is these little changes that happen to the cars from weekend to weekend to try and make the field more competitive, so then you don't have to spend so much developing a car so it'll be faster. When it comes to the hypercar class, there are several different factors that they can tinker with. The mass, the weight of the car, power, and the power in terms of typically kilowatts or a percentage in terms of power gain after 250 kilometers per hour, and also the stint energy. Now, stint energy means, well, in essence, this virtual counter of the amount of energy that you can burn. It's a combination of fuel and the hybrid, and it leads to some interesting results when you factor in, for example, the Valkyrie does not have a hybrid system. But anyways, the BOP for this weekend. In terms of the weight, the Alpine loses 2 kilos and the Peugeot loses 1 kilo compared to at Qatar. So that continues to make the Peugeot the lightest car. At the same time, the 963 has lost 11 kilos, whilst the Cadillac has gained 11. And the Valkyrie's gained 9, the BMW 5, the Ferrari 8, and the Toyota 1. Which means the Toyota is notably the heaviest car by a good 12 kilos over the Porsche going into this weekend. And that's probably factoring in the performance last year. At the same time, when you look at the power, both the Porsche and the Toyota lose power below 250 kilometers per hour. And they get a bit of a buff when it comes to the power gain after 250 kilometers per hour. The team that has the highest increase in terms of power output is the Alpine, which will make it nearly as powerful as the Peugeot, whilst at the same time there's a light buff for the Aston and small buffs of around 7 or 8 kilowatts for the BMW, Cadillac and Ferrari. In terms of the energy changes though, the Cadillac has an additional 8 megajoules of power available over the course of the stint, meaning that it, the BMW, the Alpine and the Toyota are all at the highest capacity. Peugeot and Porsche lose a little bit and end up going towards the middle of the pack, whilst at the lowest end at 900 megajoules you have the Ferrari and you have the Valkyrie. Now that could be because the ways that they're LMHs are built, they don't use as much power. For example, it's a bit like saying, okay, your fuel tank is a certain size, you're losing 1 or 2 litres of fuel in your fuel tank capacity out of 120, but it turns out the cars that are keeping at 120 go through that 120 litres in an hour, and you're going to go through 115 in an hour and 5 minutes. If you're burning less fuel, you don't need to worry so much about the stint energy, especially, for example, the Valkyrie, which doesn't have a hybrid. But yeah, that's BOP, and that's a bit of the method to the madness, at least for the hypercar class. Now, in terms of lineup changes, there are a couple of lineup changes going into this weekend. Firstly, the 2 Valkyries are down to 2 drivers. Ross Gunn and Roman DeAngelis, who are the IMSA duo, are not competing in Imola, so the 007 will only be driven by Tom Gamble and Harry Tinknell, whilst the 009 will be only driven by Alex Riberas and Marco Sorensen. Meanwhile, in the LMGT3 class, Ben Barnicoat won't be racing for Acadis ASP. Instead, Esteban Masson will be taking up the mantle behind the wheel of the 78. You don't tend to see that much driver rotation happening in the World Endurance Championship, but it is something that can happen here and there. And in terms of the schedule, I'll give you it in local time. Friday at 11 o'clock, you have the first free practice before 4 p.m. having FP2. On the Saturday, FP3 is about 10:30, whilst qualifying will run from about 2:30 onwards, whilst the race on the Sunday will start at 1 p.m, meaning it will end a little after 7 p.m. local time. In the UK, you take an hour off of it, so about 10 o'clock for FP1 on the Friday, 3 o'clock for FP2, FP3 around 9:30, qualifying starting about 1:30, and the race starting at midday, ending about 6 p.m. In terms of ones to watch, well, Ferrari are the informed team, aren't they? They ended up doing, well, I was going to say, really well at Qatar, but that is an understatement. They locked out the podium in Qatar. So, they are the informed team. They didn't have the best performance last year at their home event, but you got 3 cars, and 3 cars that have been ridiculously competitive over the past couple of years. Just see if they're going to be in form at home this time around. At the same time, I would say that Porsche Penske are a team to keep an eye on. Whilst they haven't had the best start to the season in WEC, look over at IMSA. They've been absolutely dominant so far this year. They haven't had the pole positions. That's gone the way of BMW. And BMW would be somebody to look at in terms of their qualifying performance. But I wouldn't necessarily expect BMW to be up at the fighting end of the front of the grid for the end of the race. It'll be interesting to see how Aston Martin perform, because, well, it was essentially an elongated shakedown the first round. I would not be surprised if they end up towards the tail end of the field. Again, it is only their second race, their first time racing at Imola, so BOP is likely to be unkind on them this season. But if they can get a top 10, that would be wonderful for them. At the same time, in LMGT3, I will be looking for how Esteban Masson does. Now, he drove for ASP at Le Mans last year, but at the same time, most of the experience got in GT3 is in the Ferrari, in ELMS last year. He's currently doing an LMP2 campaign in ELMS, but the background for Masson is mostly Formula racing, right? French F4, and currently doing Super Formula Light over on the Japanese circuit. I mean, at the same time, you'd be a bit silly to bet against the current people at the front of the championship, the likes of TF Sport, who have been in great form, as have United Autosports. WRT, well, they had 1 podium, and then the other team was in 11th at the end of the last race, but WRT were great last year, right? Like I said, they were the only 2 cars to finish on the lead lap. But yeah, I would say that they're going to run well. I would be interested to see how Ford runs, because Ford didn't have necessarily the best of luck last year. I would be interested to see how Ferrari runs at home, though. Again, last year was okay for them. I think their best one was in 4th place, the best Vista AF Corsa entry. But TF Sport, it's the second year for the Corvette on the LMGT3 circuit. Let's see how it goes, eh? Anyways, those are my thoughts, those are my feelings, those are my predictions. Let me know yours in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for watching as always, folks. I hope to have a review out in the days after the race, but it could be the middle of next week before you hear my thoughts on the race itself. So, until then, unless you're going to check out any of the other wonderful motorsport content that I cover on here, it's bye-bye for now.